This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans, and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/adventures in Angular.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another Adventures in Angular show. This week on our panel we have Alyssa Nicoll.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out if I was unmuted or not, so I just kind of gave back my hello. That was weird.
That was awesome.
Hey,
Joe Eames.
Hey, everybody.
John Papa.
Dracaris.
Ward Bell.
I'm giggling. It's Ward.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and all the background noise, that's me. I'm sorry. I'm in Oakland at a conference, so dialing in for that. We have a special guest this week, and that's Alex Eagle. Alex, do you want to say hi?
Hello. Shall I give an intro?
Yeah. Do you want to just let people know who you are, why you're famous?
Yeah. I guess I'm like a minor internet celebrity in the corner of the internet where people build large Angular apps. So I work on the Angular core team. I've been on the team for about 3 years. Spent most of that time doing developer tooling, so making the Angular compiler work with our internal build system, and TypeScript, and making Angular work in TypeScript. All that stuff down in the plumbing. And for the last year, I've been working on making that internal tool chain converged with what everybody externally is using.
Yeah, I think when I talked to Brad about it, I think I used the words Bazel and new in the same sentence, and he corrected me on that. So do you want to just talk about, how Google does it and what that means for us going forward with Angular?
Sure. So I started at Google at the end of 2008, and around that time, it was just at the tail end of any other build system existing at Google. And so we've been using Bazel for about 10 years. Almost every piece of software at Google is built with Bazel. The only things that are the exception is stuff that you've seen in open source, like Chromium and Android. They usually have their own separate code repository too. But all the rest of the software, all the services that you use, and all the Google products that are online are in a single mono repository. They all share code, the front ends, the back ends, everything is together, and it's all built by this one build system. So
this is every piece of code ever written at Google?
Right.
So wait a minute. If they make a change in Gmail or something like that, they have to recompile absolutely everything everywhere?
It's a benefit because, Ward, if they make a change in Gmail, they might want to know what they broke, right? So we're doing continuous integration for real, where every change is integrated against all the rest of the software. So if you think about it, you maintain a library and you have users of your library across the company. You don't want to find out in 2 months when they try to upgrade that you broke them with a change, like in your last release. You want to find out when you land that change. So actually, all of our library code, for the most part, is released on commit.
Talk about a monorepo.
So this is the monorepo. Yeah, this is the monorepo on crack. Like, monorepos, I think, are a good idea for everybody. Angular itself has a monorepo, but Google's is the largest in the world that we know of. And there's some really cool talks. Check out the At Scale conference, where there's a talk about our monorepo there.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, it's cool.
I'm going to go out and write a bot that's going to write a bigger monorepo.
So like if you do a clean build at Google, in theory, you start off compiling C++ compiler. Then you compile, then we compile Node.js. Then Node.js compiles the Angular compiler. And the Angular compiler compiles Angular core and Common and the other packages that have directives in them. And now we're ready to run NGC on the first piece of user code. So that sounds really painful and slow, but in fact, our users have like a 2-second turnaround time. And that's what's amazing and cool. And even if you don't want your monorepo to contain the sources for your C++ compiler, you still end up having a lot of sources that your company does maintain, and it's really useful to be able to build them all at head. But just to be clear, Bazel works. So Bazel is the build tool we use, and it grew up alongside of our monorepo. But the product that we've externalized works pretty well with multi-repos as well. So for example, yesterday I needed to hook up part of Angular's optimization pipeline, which is in a repo called the Angular Dev Kit. We have this component called Build Optimizer that's just part of the toolchain that we use when we're minifying apps. In order to use that from the Angular repository, it's still a single Bazel build, and I just point one repository at the other one, and now when I do the build, it crosses over the repository boundary, and I'm building the Angular Dev Kit, and then I'm building Angular all as part of the same build command.
So that would mean if somebody, like there's two schools of thought. There's a school, well, there's plenty of schools, but there are people who like monorepos, and then there are people who like micro repos, and you could arrange to work in both contexts. Is that correct?
Bazel will work in both contexts. I think if you have many repos, you do have a lot of challenges around continuous integration. If I land a change, if I propose a change, if I have a PR, let's say in one repo, how do I make sure that doesn't break with the repo? I think there are probably tools out there because it's people had that necessity. But in multi-repo setups I've seen, you end up with a bad continuous integration. Integration is really more like monthly. Try your best to throw together software from all the repos. I've heard that described as a benefit because from a software architect's point of view, it means that you have this really good decoupling between different, if you're talking microservices, it means each of your services ought to be able to operate. But I think as software engineers, we all know that when we do go to integrate the software, we discover that, the consumer was making some kind of assumption about the service that wasn't encoded in the service description. And you have to fix it before you consume, whether or not you think it's architecturally sound.
Yeah. Well, that's the repo discussion. But if this is my tool chain, I get to. Your point is that I can do it if I build it if I choose to do so.
Point one is that I recommend monorepos. I think that's a great thing to investigate. But the rest of this conversation, you can use a monorepo or you can stick with what you have. Either way, we should be able to use Angular's build toolchain.
Now, another thing you mentioned in passing was that you were building some things in Java, you were building some things in C++, you built something TypeScript. So it's not pegged to any one environment?
Correct. It's a multi-language build system. So, for one thing, if you want then your backend developers to be able to cross over, then it's helpful to have the same build tool. If you want your backend and frontend to actually compile against the same artifacts, like you have some interface definition for the JSON schema that you're shipping from the backend, it's really good to have the build system understand both. But it also means that the tools that you use do not have to all be written in JavaScript. So I think what we've seen in the JavaScript ecosystem is, that tool is, any tool that comes from outside the JavaScript ecosystem, we assume is going to be very hard to integrate. And so even though in the world of software development, we've had a lot of great tools over many years, the JavaScript ecosystem has typically not adopted any of those tools because it's hard to build it into their tool chain. It's an advantage. For example, the dev server that we use is written in Go. It's way fast. It allows us to do things that are a bit closer to the metal. I think it's more appropriate for a dev server. A lot of you can write a lot of great stuff in Go. Why should you not be able to write some of the tools in Go and some of the tools in JavaScript, and then you can all interoperate?
Cool. So that's how you roll internally. The project you've been working on is making them available to us outside. And I'll tell you, while I'm doing that, asking that question, I'll give one of the contexts when I first heard about this is like, oh, great. Out here in the world, we don't have enough tool chains. We need more, especially a proprietary one, a gigantic company that does things and has all these gazillion engineers, top flight engineers, and the rest of us poor slobs are out here just trying to make do. So, how are you approaching us to make us feel like this is going to be a good idea? I mean, how are you sort of tackling this whole problem?
We're talking about whether Google has the best engineers in the world. I'm not sure that that's true. So we're talking about this build system that we use called Bazel. I want to make the point at Facebook and Twitter, they developed a clone called Pants and respectively, because they also have great engineers. They're like, hey, do you know what we build a system that has all these properties? And a lot of them came from Google, so they sort of knew what the magic recipe was. And it's basically, let me try and just give like the 1-minute description of why Bazel is so great. So, like Make, in that you don't tell the build system what to do. Instead, you give it a bunch of inference rules. So you say, hey, if you need to make B, you can make it with A and do this thing to it. And if you need to make C, you can make that from B if you do this thing to it. And so you just give a bunch of transforms that are possible to go from some set of inputs to some set of outputs. And now the user at the end says, hey, I want to build Z. And then the system says, oh, well, let's see. So I know that in order to do that, I need to take like Y and W and X and put those together. But hey, in order to get Y, I have to do this thing. And so it builds this chain of actions that it has to perform. But then the next step is it says, okay, which of these actions is different from last time? So it looks at the inputs to each one and it says, hey, W, X, and Y are all the same as last time, so I don't need to redo this action. Z is already up to date. Here you go. Take 0 seconds. So one thing that's really cool about this build system is that everything is incremental. It only rebuilds the stuff that is dirty with respect to the last time it did a build. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be that you locally did a build before so that you have W, X, Y, and Z all up to date. You could also get them from a remote cache. So as long as all of these actions conform to a couple of guarantees that we can talk about, it means that they can all be performed on some remote machine. So you can have like 100 machines in the cloud do your build, and you can pull cache hits from some other machine. So assuming that your CI is up to date, it just built master a few minutes ago. So most of your local build should actually be a cache hit. So even though we have this monorepo and we're building a lot of stuff from source, we don't actually redo those builds very often unless something's changed. But it does mean that if you do change something, you don't need to go say, hey, I changed it, and then I need to distribute the package to our internal artifact. Appears to me, although it appears as JavaScript and it was originally offered as TypeScript, so if I need to debug it, now the source maps are messed up. You don't have any of that. You just make a change, and the change is always live in everywhere that you use that code.
So just to recap just a tiny bit, whenever you're talking like X, Y, and Z, what you're really talking about is like projects, like, Angular or Material or stuff like that, right?
So it's kind of up to you how granular the graph is, but actually, when I say W, X, Y, and Z, what I'm actually thinking is like Material Button or Angular Core. So each one of those things is really a compilation unit. And in order to make the build system perform really well, we don't want to like compile all of Material as one big thing. Partly because it's slow, it consumes a lot of memory, it doesn't scale well if Material grows. So what we want is the scaling property that no matter how big your enterprise is, your builds are always 2 seconds. And so that means that you want the size of each compilation unit to be relatively fixed over time, and that the growth should be in the number of compilation units and not the size of the typical compilation unit. So we actually you can think of them as separate packages, but we do our packages very fine grained. So you could think of every directory in your app as a different package.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Is that what we should be doing? Are you recommending that we build at that degree of granularity, or even at the
So there's a question like what's appropriate for different use cases? I wouldn't say that like a Hello World Angular user has to have their app split up into a different package per directory because they have a total of 3,000 lines of code. They're not reaching any sort of scaling threshold where that's appropriate.
That's a big Hello World, Alex. Now I know John recommends having you template in one module and your component class in another. That's John. He likes to split these things.
Okay, so maybe 300 lines. But you see my point. So at that scaling factor, you're perfectly fine with a very simple tool chain that just does the naive thing that every time you run the tool chain, it reperforms all of the work and it does a compilation, like it runs the TypeScript compiler or the Angular compiler against the world, right? And if you do a compilation in Angular CLI, you're actually compiling not just your app, you're also compiling the Angular libraries and any libraries you depend on because they don't ship with the generated code, right? So the Angular compiler assumes that you use your local version of the compiler to compile the world, including the libraries you depend on. Mm-hmm. Under Bazel, we don't do it that way because no global step, no global compilation, no global static analysis can scale when your project gets really big. And so what we're interested in doing is maybe one day the everybody Hello World use case will use these tools. But the most important thing for me right now is the big enterprises who are having scaling problems, I think are the first place that we want to adopt this tool chain.
Okay, so
that's where I'm targeting today.
First off, then, what we're not talking about here is I'm a dev at a small company. I'm on a team of 4. My company, or even 10, right? And we build primarily one or a small handful of projects. Now we're not talking about, hey, I should be looking at Bazel, right?
Probably not. Like there are maybe a couple other cases where it's useful, like if you're developing a front end and a back end and you want to build them together, or if you're planning for future scale. But yeah, I agree. That developers they don't need to look at this right now.
Right. But I'm at Regents Healthcare. We've got several hundred developers. We're building dozens and dozens of projects, and we've been experiencing a little bit of difficulty with our builds, and that we're trying to keep everything either monorepo, or we have a few of those, and the builds are grinding to a halt as we try to check dependencies as we change things. Now is the time that.
Well, how fast is your development turnaround on that?
Yeah. I'm making up a story here, so you tell me what the thresholds are and what that matters to the people that are listening.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me to see some real world numbers too. I've been asking that from early adopters. It seems like there's a wide spectrum of how long builds take, and there's another aspect to it, which is production build versus development build. You're going to run optimizers for production that are by nature a global program analysis, like tree shaking. You need to say, oh, can I remove this function? Well, it depends. Is it used anywhere? And those kind of optimizers are too slow to work in a dev mode at scale. So what I'm talking about when I say 2 seconds, this is our objective. Like you should expect anytime you make any source change, or at least on the median, right? There's some distribution of times, but at the 50th percentile, we should take 2 seconds from when you change something to seeing that live in your app in the browser, including fetching the source to the browser and like parse eval time in the browser and module loading time in the browser, all the way up to your app starts running. So We're talking 2 seconds. That's the thing to take home.
Okay.
Well, that includes, of course, Angular ahead of time compiler. It includes all of the toolchain except for the optimizers.
Yeah. Well, one other thing that I really like about some of this is that if I go and work on like the authentication piece, then the rest of my app that doesn't really tie into that much, I don't have to go do all that work again and wait for it to compile. And it sounded like it handled a lot of the stuff that, hasn't changed in the current set of changes, and it just recompiles everything else. Did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, that's correct. You can think of it kind of like change detection in Angular. Like we go back and we say which of the things that the build has to do are dirty, and we just reperform those. So like this TypeScript compile is dirty because one of its inputs is a DTS file that came from another library, and since that changed, we might have to retype check this library. But now the outputs from this guy are the same as last time, so then we don't have to retype check anything down the chain, for example.
Yeah, that just makes a ton of sense to me. It's like, hey, we're just going to do the work that we know we need to do, and make sure that everything is functioning as expected.
So if you guys don't mind, I can propose a next thing to talk about, since I've given this pitch a couple times, which is what does the configuration look like?
I definitely want to hear that, but I think we're circling around something that's really important, which is how do I know when, and we haven't talked about the Angular enclosure part of it, but the Bazel, when do I know that Bazel is good for me?
If your development turnaround time is slower than you need it to be, so it kind of depends on your tolerance, but I mean, for me, if it took more than 20 seconds to make a change and see it in the browser, I'll get distracted and go look at Twitter or something. So that's the hard cutoff. Like as soon as you get distracted and you can't stay in the zone working, then you need to improve your build toolchain.
Couldn't you also just decide to do shock collars for your devs to fix that issue?
I haven't seen that used in an enterprise setting, but it sounds like an interesting approach.
Enterprise
it just keeps you focused.
So
I think that's a pretty good.
Though, are you talking about in development or in production?
This is development mode.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Like you were saying, tree shaking and stuff takes forever.
Sorry, Alyssa, what was your question?
Oh, I was just curious if production is faster because of this build system.
It's
like whenever you're...
Is. Right, okay. So I've been working on the roll-up and uglify rules for the last couple of weeks. And, it doesn't have to rebuild the app. Like if you just finished in development mode, you've already run TypeScript and Angular compilers on everything. Like the only step that's left to run is roll-up and uglify in that case. And it's actually even smarter than that. Like there are times when you change some uglify settings, you don't need to roll up, right? The only affected when you change uglify settings is the uglify action itself, and its inputs don't change. So you do get some incrementality benefits in production.
Okay.
All right. So that's that's a metric that everybody understands. They understand their own productivity, and they can say, "Wow, this what I'm doing now is just sucks. It's not good for me. It's not good for my team. Let me look at this Bazel thing." So what am I for Bazel thing? Sorry, I just
Bazel.
This,
I like
yeah, so what what am I in for here? I guess the other part that I think I articulated was my nervousness about taking on one more tool, even if it promises me. I mean, you got me interested. Like, okay, I got to change the way things are going here. Maybe Bazel could do it. But my big fear is that I'm going to be going down a rabbit hole, and that this thing is going to be a big problem. And I'll spend all my life on BuildTools instead of building the app.
Right. So like, I mean, one answer to that is like the community switched from Grunt to Gulp largely at some point. And a lot of people switch from Gulp to Webpack. Every few years, you change BuildTools. I think that happens.
Oh man, I'm behind again.
You're still on Grunt? You could use
No, you're right, though. I think those things just change.
So like there's some amount of churn, and maybe Bazel can be next in line. Obviously, another point there is that at some point when the Angular CLI, when ABC is far enough along that we think it can be the build system underneath Angular CLI, then you won't even know that it happened. Like, do you remember when the Angular CLI switched from Broccoli to Webpack?
Yep.
Was it a big deal? Did it affect your project a lot?
Not that part. When it changed from System.js, that affected me.
Yeah. Okay. To the extent that you're exposed to the configuration, then yes, that does change.
Exactly. But if the underlying stuff changes, who cares?
So yeah, Ward, you're not wrong. And in fact, maybe the other concern you should have with Bazel is, like Gulp and Grunt were constrained to this subset of my enterprise where I'm building a front end, and the back end people, they have some other build tool they use. But when you look at Bazel, it makes a lot more sense to adopt it across the whole stack. So now you have to like walk across the hall and say, hey, backend team, are you guys still using whatever, Gradle or something? Like maybe we should both switch. So that's actually a big organizational thing to tackle.
Do I have to? In other words, if I can't get the other team to go, I can still say, well, this is my corner of the universe, and at least I'm using Bazel for this.
Yes, of course you can. So imagine that you have this incremental migration, and you say, okay, the first step is I'm just going to use Bazel to build to run the TypeScript compiler on this library. Then I take the output from Bazel and I use like ngc from the command line. You could do that, and then you'll say, but that means every time I'm rebuilding the Angular compiler, even if it doesn't change. And so you can, over time, expand the scope of that Bazel, the seed inside of your project, and say, okay, now this thing that I was taking Bazel's outputs and operating with them outside of Bazel, and now I'll build something so that next step is done inside of Bazel as well. And we're doing that even on the Angular team. Like we started using Bazel just to do build and test, and now we're expanding it to build our NPM packages. So we get some benefit. Obviously you've paved the most frequently driven road first, and then you expand as it makes sense for you.
Okay, so now you got me interested. I can see why I want to do it, and I'm getting the feeling that it won't. I don't have to boil the ocean in order to get into it. So what's it going to be like for me? I mean, it may be rough now because you're still doing it, but what's it look like today, and what do you think it's going to look like when you get where you want to be?
And if I could interject before you answer, Alex, like today people are using tools. Let's say they're using Jenkins or Travis or something like that as a CI tool. But would they still use that with Bazel? Or like what do they stop using and what do they start using?
So Bazel is a build tool, and Jenkins and Travis and Circle CI are CI tools. And CI has always been like, you just tell us what command to run and we run it, right? You would just change your Circle or your Jenkins config and you say, don't run npm build or ng build -- prod, run Bazel build source : bundle, or whatever the top level thing is. So you can think of it.
That's always been unclear to me. It's like, is Bazel going to be the whole CI process or just another build tool? Instead of running ng build or ng serve, we run Bazel food.
It is just a build tool. I would love to talk about. I've actually been working with the Circle CI team to do some really cool stuff in the interaction between CI and the build tool. And there are a couple of pretty thin interactions that are useful. In particular, you really want on CI to have this caching so that your CI itself is incremental and you're not waiting 30 minutes every time you push a new commit to see whether it's red or green. That's super cool, and we have that working on Circle CI right now. There's no reason you couldn't do that on other CI systems, but CI is a little bit relevant, but it's really on the periphery. It's really more like some techniques to make life even better.
Cool. Thanks.
So Word says, okay, so what does it look like today, and what will it look like? So what it looks like today is you need to do a small amount of configuration of Bazel. I think even in the end state where the CLI, where Angular CLI is running Bazel for you, you might still see some of that configuration. It's not like the Webpack config. It's not like any of the configuration you see in JavaScript today, where every tool wants you to give it a JSON file, and that JSON file has lots of settings, and some of those settings are telling it where the inputs and outputs go, and some of those settings are telling it about other tools that need to run, like plugins or something, and some of those settings are options that you can turn on and off, like strictness or like aggressiveness of optimization. And the configuration space is enormous and insane, and there are lots of jokes out there about like, I need somebody to come and help me configure my JavaScript tools. And you can watch Igor Minar's talk from, I forget where it was earlier this year, and he's like, oh, did you know that almost everybody doesn't turn on this one setting, and so all their apps are much bigger than they need to be? So that's kind of sad. On the other hand, you have Angular CLI, where it gives you almost no configuration, but it also gives you no customization, right? So if you want to do something different, even a little bit different, you have to do ng eject, and now you're responsible for all the configuration again. So what I've realized, especially recently as we're switching Angular over to Bazel, is that it's got this sweet middle spot where there's very little configuration, but you still have customization. And the way it does that is that you have these primitives, I would call them. TS library is one. So TS library says, okay, my job is you give me types and I produce JavaScript and DTS files out. And then you can have an ng module, which is the Angular compiler, that depends on a TS library. So basically, each one of these things is just kind of describing a chunk of your program. It's like, okay, this chunk is TypeScript sources, this chunk is Sass files, this chunk is something that I want to go into a rollup bundle. And then you just take these, what they're called rules. This is like a plugin for Bazel is called a rule. You can take these things and just compose them together in whatever way you want. So as long as some rule produces a JS file, I can take this other like rollup bundle rule and apply it to that. And what's cool is not only do you not need to configure the inputs and output locations, because that's obviously like Bazel controls the layout of the output directory, but you don't even need to configure the tools that much. And a good example is the TypeScript compiler. You don't need to tell it whether to produce ES5 or ES2015 output, because that's actually controlled by some other rule downstream. If you're running the dev server, it will ask for the ES5 output from all the TypeScript rules above it in the graph. And if you're running a production bundler, it might ask for the ES2015 sources from all the things up the graph. So the rules actually configure each other, which is super cool. And it means that the user really is only responsible to say, here's a chunk of files, and they go together as a unit. And I describe that they are TypeScript code, and here's their dependencies, and I'm basically done. So I think that the configuration is pretty nice. That's what you're exposed to today. So it's kind of, the syntax is technically like a Python subset. So, if you're allergic to Python, it kind of hurts. And maybe one day we'll start looking soon at whether we can actually just have the CLI generate all that configuration for you. But like I said, there's not very much configuration. It's really more about how to split your app up into chunks.
Do you envision me like going shopping for rules for different parts of my thing, and it's sort of in the same way I do for NPM packages?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's already an ecosystem of Bazel rules. They don't all interoperate, which is partly my job to solve, especially in the JavaScript space, because something like the TS library rule has multiple kinds of JavaScript flavors that it can produce, like ES5 and ES2015 or different module formats. We need some way for these rules to, like, what's the API of one rule talking to another? In most of Bazel, the API is simple. It's just I produce this kind of file and you consume that kind of file, and so we can play together. So I think this sort of the Bazel ecosystem as a whole, in which there are several different sets of rules for doing the same thing. I think within the Angular ecosystem, what we're going to see is a lot of people writing specific rules to bring a tool that they like into the tool chain. And yeah, it'll be no problem for you to go shopping among those. We just need to have some sort of compatibility test repo where we mix the things together and have a CI that says that it works.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
See, that would be really advantageous to me as I'm thinking about it, because every time I look at a configuration file, like, I don't know how to, if I adjust it over here, that blows up somebody else, and or I don't even know what it is, and I don't know how to take advantage of something that Joe did, or something that Chuck did, or something that Alyssa did.
Like that Webpack config file. Every time I eject and look at that, or I do a class on it, it gets bigger. I think it grows by 50 lines every day I show it. And that scares people, it's too much.
Right. And I just wanted to change one thing, and where do I go to get that one thing? If I knew that, if John calls me up and says, hey, man, here's the better TS Live rule set, all you got to do is just, shop for it, put it here like I do in a package JSON or however you're going to do it, Alex. And it's going to compose. I can count on Bazel composing it without my having to worry about if they exact too much, if they have to stomp on each other or doing all that stuff. Is that kind of the vision, that it would go like that?
Absolutely. That's the composability model in Bazel. You have inputs and outputs, and as long as they match up, you can swap out the rule. This is open source, so you can fork my rules and make some local changes if that's what you need to do. Even just the last couple of days, I was doing trying to help somebody who had an issue with his Webpack rule. Never heard of this person. Oh, he wrote a Webpack rule that plugs into my TypeScript rules. Great. And in fact, we don't have time to get into it here, but if you start writing your own Bazel rules, there's actually a really nice mechanism to do code sharing within them. So one example is that I have a rollup bundle rule that applies generally to JavaScript code. And then I made an NG rollup bundle rule that adds Angular's build optimizer and a couple other Angular specific things. And it's really only like 30 lines of code, because it mostly is just like, okay, I do the same thing as rollup bundle, but I have these extra 2 inputs and I run this one extra action.
Okay. You got my attention.
Okay.
Where are you?
I'll sell you 3.
Where are you going? I mean, where are we in the process of getting the world to make it safe for Bazel, for Bazel?
So we're right on the edge of sort of an early access. So I've reached out to some early adopters and I've said, hey, try this stuff out. I also have enthusiastic people on the internet. I would say we're heading into a beta period with it. What that means, but I would say for Angular 6, we have committed that one of the options for building Angular libraries and distributing Angular libraries is going to be APC. By the way, we didn't cover all the acronyms. It stands for Angular BuildTools Convergence. That's the official acronym.
ADTC?
Well, is one word in this formulation.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that in the English language. Cool.
Well, that's how I type it. I don't put a space.
Wait a minute. It used to be Angular, Bazel, and Clojure, but you changed it to something else?
Yes.
Or was it ever officially Angular, Bazel, and Clojure?
It did used to stand for that.
Is this Windows NT used to be? Nobody knew what NT stood for and still don't.
It's not new technology?
Nope.
It might be like that. No, so I think part of the reason I renamed it is that I want to make convergence. I want to make it clear that we're not going to try and put Google's toolchain out there and make you switch. In a lot of cases, I'm going to take the external toolchain and bring it internal. Like the stuff that we have, it's not as good as external. Obviously, I want the convergence to be, we use the same thing as outside, and that thing is the best of both. The other reason I changed it is that Clojure compiler does produce the best bundles, but it's super hard to use right now. I think for a lot of companies, they might be better off with Rollup and Simplify, or they might be better off with Webpack. Those options are all still in there, and so I don't want to make the project seem like we've only one bundling optimizer.
Right. That makes so much sense.
Do we know what we get out of the box with Webpack today with Angular?
I have not worked on Webpack rules yet. I have a couple of contributors who've written them, and there's somebody out there who I don't know who's been working on one.
To be clear, I don't know either. I know at one point they were talking about putting rollup into it, and then the closure compiler, and I don't know where they landed. Do you remember that work?
Yeah, there's a branch of closure compiler called Webpack that was specifically trying to make that path better paved.
In the Angular CLI, though? I mean, that's what I'm saying. Is in the Angular CLI, which one is it using?
Yeah, the CLI still uses Webpack. I don't think there's we use rollup only to build Angular's packages, right? So for libraries we use rollup, but for end user applications we use Webpack. At least today. I think I don't know exactly where this is going to head. I think since Bazel is a general purpose build tool, like I said, somebody could write a rule that does it a different way. The important thing is to benchmark, so we can compare these things well. So one of the things we've built as part of ABC is a development round trip benchmarking suite. So we can keep track both over time and between different sets of rules or different approaches. We can keep track of, am I hitting the 2-second turnaround time, along with a few other metrics, like how much memory pressure is there on my machine? Like, will I be able to build my app if it's 10 times bigger, or do I have to get all my developers a 64 gig box? So I think measurement is important. And then, we have to let the community take it in a direction. I'm going to support a particular flavor of this, which is whatever Google is using, because that's what's converged. But it doesn't mean that you can't customize this toolchain.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier that struck me, I'm thinking about an enterprise, and and you were just talking about how big a box I'd have to have. But what if I wanted to put some of this in the cloud, right? Because also then I get the benefit of the caching of something that if I'm building it and we're all we could all share the previously cached build or something, then we go a lot faster, right? So is there a plan for a cloud-based version of this that would make life easier for me?
That's a great question, Ward. It's almost like I fed it to you, but I didn't. I promise everybody. So yeah, I was talking caching on the CI, but in fact, sure, you can, like everybody's Bazel, you can configure it and say the cache is at this address. So you want the cache to have low network latency because the cache is racing against what your local machine can do. And in most cases, you make a change to a file, you're doing an incremental build, and you really only have to kick off 2 compilers, and one of them uses the outputs from the other, so you can't get a lot of parallelism, and so you have plenty of cores locally. And basically use all the cores on your machine. So if you have like a 12-core workstation, then you can parallelize out pretty wide in the middle of a big build. But you still have 2 scenarios where that doesn't help. One is if you have enough cores to build saturated, like there are actions that could be performed now, but there's no core available to run them on. Or if you're doing an initial build and you've made a change somewhere, like you did your package JSON and your dependencies have changed, and now lots of stuff needs to be rebuilt, it's going to be slow because you don't have enough local resources. And so there's also a feature in Bazel, which is remote execution. And we already have Google Cloud has a hosted build execution farm, and there's also an open source project that allows you to host your own, maybe writing like a turnkey remote execution service. And yeah, it's exactly what you said. Like every engineer at Google relies heavily on the fact that we have a cloud-hosted build farm to make our giant Monorepo builds fast enough. Because I'll have like 6,000 actions to perform on a typical build. I think when you build Google Cloud Console, you have like hundreds of thousands of actions. So yeah, just use a couple thousand machines, and it's not that slow.
Easy peasy.
Yeah. Just every problem is solved with a massive data center.
Tom Watson was right. We only need 6 computers.
Every problem, including my bad back, solved by a massive data center.
Yeah, put that on a t-shirt.
So what are you worried about here? Why isn't he here already? Or what keeps you up at night about this project?
Oh man. Well, now that it's starting to pick up in adoption, obviously, I'm worried that I won't be able to keep up. There's going to be, I think, this could have hockey stick shape, especially if we start getting an ecosystem of people writing rules. And right now it's me and one contractor working on this thing and sort of owning the whole space. We didn't even talk about the parts of ABC that are outside of the build system, like linting and like massive refactoring of a monorepo. Like, how do I turn on no implicit any on my TypeScript build if I have a zillion lines of TypeScript code? So there's a lot of stuff in scope. Mostly I'm just worried about success. Failure would be easy. I should point out, to that end, I am trying to ramp up the Google developer experts, which is sort of our first line of trainers and consultants and experts and who can help scale up the support and also contribute a lot back to the ecosystem. Not to say that everybody on the internet can't, but those are people who have dedicated more time to do that. So I'm hoping to get a lot of the Google developer experts ramped up on how this stuff works so they can be helpful and diagnose people's issues and help to do customization where needed.
So I confess I'm watching some of those conversations, and they are very encouraging. But as a guy who's got a zillion of other projects going, I'm kind of like, I'm going to wait until they iron it out. But your sense is that it's going to be the kind of thing that I'm like, if I have to become a deep expert at Bazel, I'm going to. It's just not something I want to be. I talk to John about this all the time. It's like, I don't want to be good at packaging. I don't want to be good at any of these things because I can't. Like, I'm barely good, if at all, at the things that I focused on. So this is maybe I'm having a mental breakdown here, but I'm looking for that thing when I know that it's safe to go, even in the water, to try it. Are we close there? I mean, I know you're saying wait until it'll come out in the CLI and all that, but is it the kind of thing where I dare try it myself?
I think it's a really great thing to at least like sort of have a little bit of firsthand experience with what it's like to do this incremental build thing. So I think it's a good idea to at least check out the example repo and sort of build it and kick the tires a little bit.
Can you give me the 1 minute? Here's what happens: where you walk in the door, you turn the handle to the right. This is what you're going to experience, and bang, you're gonna be there. Can you give me like that story? Like, what's it going to be like if I just want to try this?
Yes, that's the README on github.com/AlexEagle/Angular-Bazel-example, which is my canonical example repo. It's also linked from everywhere. The README on that repo is intended to be exactly that. It's like, hey, look, so you install, you run your first build. Here's how you bring up the dev server. Here's how you run the tests. Cool. So that's your walkthrough. I think to your other question, like how much expertise will I need to build in this tool over time? Since we're talking about convergence with what Google does, you can just look at what Google engineers go through. When they join, they have they do have a few days ramp up on how to operate the build system. I think you probably do in any new job. And then for the most part, most of them don't know about like how the incrementality works behind the scenes. They just run whatever their team does. And so unless you're a BuildTools engineer, you don't have to go any deeper than that.
All right, you convinced me. I'm gonna steal a few hours and try it.
Yeah, you should try it now, Ward, while I still have time to answer questions and issues.
That is the tempting prop. I think we're coming close, but I want to, Alex. What do we need to know that we haven't asked, or what do you want from us? I guess you want from us to go try it, but I mean, this is your chance to give us that hook or say whatever you want to say.
Find me some more eager contributors, and I'll give them projects. Yeah, just looking for obviously for good adopters to help give feedback and file the issues and shake out the design problems, and then contribution time.
That sounds great.
Do you have some kind of target date for releasing this?
So Angular 6, which is targeted for like late March-ish, ngconf-ish, is going to have ABC as one of the two options for building libraries. So that's kind of that's the firmest date I have for when some set of people would use Bazel. So obviously, library developers are, I think, a more sophisticated set of developers on the whole, or at least they're exposed to more of these questions about like how do I ship the thing so that everybody else can consume it. We have this Angular package format where we say, hey, the thing you put on NPM has to have like several different flavors of JavaScript in it, and they have to be in just this way so that all the downstream tools can work. So that's where we're going to land first. I think. I don't think there's going to be any firm date when like an enterprise customer is happier than now. Like we're going to just keep adding features. We need to add code splitting. Right now, not all of the rules work on Windows. I need to go fix that in the next couple of weeks. And then I don't have a date when the Angular CLI might switch to Bazel as the default. I think we haven't even really done serious design thinking for that yet. We'll probably do that after Angular 6 ships.
But it'll be an option with 6. With 6 ships, we'll have an option to run it that way.
Actually, 5 had support for Bazel. Like the @angular/Bazel package has been in there since Angular v5. So it's just a question of expanding the support to cover more use cases. It's been a soft launch.
Yeah, well, those can be very successful, as opposed to the big oh no.
So one other thing that I'm wondering about, and this is something that comes up periodically when I talk about Angular with people, is not everybody is completely bought into TypeScript. And so, you're talking about, hey, you just put in a rule for TypeScript and it compiles. What about things like ES6? Is this going to make it easier for people to write Angular apps with ES6 or ES5? Or are there going to be, are there going to be other impediments to that are still going to exist?
So we're improving the story of writing Angular apps in JavaScript. We're also improving the story of writing Angular apps that you just drop on the page. You have things like Angular Elements, and this AiA project, which is a replacement for Angular's renderer, which is this internal bit, but it allows you to potentially write apps without the compiler. That stuff is sort of orthogonal to ABC in the sense that no matter what build tool you used, Angular had this had some tie-ins to TypeScript that we'd like to knock out. I do think that at the very minimum we should make sure that there are good rules out there to use Bazel to build an Angular app that's pure JavaScript. Obviously, you still need some. You don't need the TypeScript compiler in your toolchain, but you do need some other tools in the toolchain. I suppose that you could write an Angular app in pure JavaScript and have very little build tooling, and so you don't really have the problem I'm describing where your development turnaround is slow. But there's no reason that we couldn't use the Bazel toolchain for that. So I think we should at least make sure that such a thing exists. Maybe it should be part of our canonical example. I'm not sure if the Angular team would own the support for that. But there may just not be that much to do. Does
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think we want to both make it easier to just like do the simple thing, drop a script tag on the page, and my HTML lights up like it did with Angular.js, and at the same time support the enterprise use case of I want TypeScript, I want all the compilation benefits, and I don't want to wait 20 minutes for every build.
Very cool. I'm amazed that it's just you and one other person.
Yeah, my family's looking forward to when this thing is more shipped.
Aww.
Oh, they're okay. They're cute. I'll go see them tonight.
All right, well, let's go ahead and do some picks.
Are you ready to master Angular? Oasis Digital offers Angular Bootcamp, a 3-day intense workshop class for individuals or teams. They cover Angular 4 and 2 and focus on the skills and knowledge you need for complex, data-rich applications. They also still offer AngularJS for teams supporting older projects. Bring them to your site or send developers to them in St. Louis, San Francisco, New York, DC, and other cities, and online at angularbootcamp.com.
Ward, do you have some picks for us?
Well, I the only, not really, but the one thing I do have is, of course, this whole time I've had this running through my head, which is the Steve Miller Band's Fly Like an Eagle. So that's my pick.
The song stuck in Ward's head,
that's
ladies
awesome.
and gentlemen.
All right, Alyssa, do you have some picks for us?
Just one. I've been really into like retro photos lately, printing, and so I have this Impossible project piece of equipment. It's like a old school Polaroid, but it has a tower on top of it, and you put your phone on it, and it like prints Polaroids from your phone, like from pictures you have on your phone. So I've just been really enjoying that. So it's called the Impossible Project if you're like a Polaroid fan like myself. So yeah, that is my pick.
Awesome. Joe, what are your picks?
All right, so I got 2 picks, one of which is not my own. John Papa had to drop off the call, and his pick was The Greatest Showman movie, which I have seen, absolutely love. So on his behalf, I'm going to pick the movie The Greatest Showman.
Oh my goodness. I've actually was listening to the soundtrack earlier today. Freaking love that movie.
Hold on,
good.
Ward,
So good.
you and I cannot agree on a movie. That's not okay.
Well, I know that's
Whoa.
You're right, like a stopwatch twice a day.
Oh, that's funny.
Which of us is the blind squirrel that did actually find a nut? Which of us is that? You've heard that saying, right?
I think you're losing your gourd, man.
Even a blind squirrel finds a nut now and then.
Yeah, I thought it was a pig, but whatever. Blind pig finds an acorn. But
Right.
yes. In an event, Joe, this is one of those rarities, and I think we should really stop and savor the moment. Savor the moment.
Awesome. Okay, my other pick is going to be a role-playing game just recently came out called Kids on Bikes. So I've lately been able to get back into playing role-playing games. My kids are old enough that I can play with them, and I'm doing a little bit with some of my peers as well, playing some Dungeons & Dragons. But for fun, my daughter, who is way into Stranger Things, I saw this role-playing game on Kickstarter that I backed. It's called Kids on Bikes, and it's a role-playing game to role-play through as a game all those movies about the kids in a small town and something weird happens, and it's the kids that are figuring everything out and solving the problems, like E.T., Stranger Things. I think it was 8mm was another one, whatever. And what I really, really, really liked about it is, as a role-playing game goes, it was very unique and very novel because it was far more of a collaborative storytelling game than it was your typical role-playing game, in that you don't start out with an idea of what's going to happen and a conflict and an enemy and a monster. Instead, both the players and the game master collaboratively work together, answering questions, and the game kind of guides you through this. And as the game master, you have to be a little bit more on your toes maybe than in other games, but the players are oftentimes the ones who come up with the next element. So, for example, in the game I played with my daughter and two of her teenage friends, my daughter's 15, they encountered the main protagonist, the 11, if you will, of Stranger Things. But I didn't even know what it was going to be. So I actually am asking one of the characters who's in the scene, saying, you turn around and you see something you never thought you would see, and what is it? And we just happened to have my rabbit in the house, and he saw the rabbit, and he says, I see a rabbit. And that became the 11, the super powered character that they had to protect was a large rabbit. So anyway, super fun game.
Tell me somebody said sharp, pointy teeth. Please.
I believe I may have said that, but I don't know that my daughter and her friends got it. I'm not sure if they've seen Holy Grail. But if you like role-playing games and you're looking for something even more interesting on the storytelling front, this game by far takes that to a level that I have never seen before in a role-playing game. And I'm kind of into checking out kind of the oddball role-playing games.
What's the suggestion of number of players for it?
I would say that it plays, based on my one experience with 3 players, I would say it would play pretty well up to 5 or 6. Beyond that, I think it's just like your typical 3 to 5 is probably ideal.
Okay.
2 seems like it's not enough players.
And that's that's not including like the DM type role person?
Yeah. Okay. So with the GM, I would say the minimum is the best that I think it's ideal to be 4 to 6 total people.
Okay. Very cool.
I think it could play with 3, but 2 would be probably way too little. Total people. There we go. Those are my picks.
So The Greatest Showman reminded me of something that John is doing. He started a 5 things series, video series, which is you get in there and you try and get teased into some technology for, in a short period of time on a fun video with that's combination of goofy and substantive. And he and I did one on RxJS, and we've got the link. We'll have the link in the show notes. And I'm not often amused by myself, but I thought we were pretty good. So check it out.
Awesome. He also posted another pick, which is a video, I think, but it's deploy a Node app to Azure in a single command. He posted a Twitter link, so I'm not exactly sure what it is. But we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well if you're looking at ways to deploy Node to Azure. I'm going to jump in here with a couple of picks as well. So I'm here at Developer Week, which is a conference in Oakland. It's been pretty fun. I also just really enjoy coming out to the Bay Area. I mean, it's a little more expensive than it is back home, but it's nice just to get away. So I'm going to pick that as well. And then the last thing that I'm going to pick, last week I was at NG Atlanta, and it was just a terrific conference. And I got to see Alyssa and Amy from JavaScript Jabber and John from this show. And all in all, it was just a really, really terrific experience. So hopefully they do it again next year. And if you get a chance to go. It was terrific. Alex, what are your picks?
All right, I got one. So I think I was looking at this cherry red Tesla Roadster, but now it seems like it's we're way out of reach. So I'm gonna launch into space like a moron.
Dude, did you actually watch the launch? That was like the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, we turned one of the big TVs in the Angular Cube into a launch party. It was pretty cool. So my pick is I like to make electronic music. But I'm always frustrated to use a computer to do it because I just get tired of computers, all day. They just torture me. So I love these little handheld devices called pocket operators from this company, Teenage Engineering. And it's basically like a little 16-channel, 16-step sequencer that looks like a retro weird video game. And then you actually can make like some pretty cool music on it. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes too.
Wow. Hey, never mind. Can it do auto-tune?
I haven't seen a module to do that. No. But you can chain them together, so you can get like a bass and a rhythm and a like melody instrument, and you can like jam out on 3 of them at a time. It's pretty cool.
Okay, because I'm looking for something to auto tune this, so we can do a whole session here. Auto tune the adventures in Angular, but I thought maybe you would know. All right.
No, I just said you could auto tune it in post. Like if Charles has a lot of extra time this week, he can just auto tune some sections of this recording.
So what do you make with that? I mean, what kind of music do you like to make with that stuff?
I mean, it's like people might describe it as techno. I like sort of like trance house, intelligent dance music, kind of like beep beep boop music. That's my particular style.
You call that that's intelligence dance? Intelligent dance?
That's a genre that's out there. You can Google that term. You'll find.
So he's not making that up, but the beep beep boop, that one was made up.
Beep beep boop is a more layman's term for that kind of music. Yeah.
and it has intelligence is something that I have a hard time associating with that, but that's okay.
It's kind of cranial. It has like a lot of polyrhythms, and it's just like tickles your brain.
I see.
Good programming music too.
All right. Well, Alex, if people want to follow this particular project, or maybe you're posting stuff to Twitter, or blog, or something like that, where do they go get information?
So the main short link is g.co/ng/abc. That's your one pager, and I have links on there to everything else.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming and talking through this with us. I think as we go forward, it's going to be more and more important to, at least understand what the tooling's doing for you, even if you don't have to be an expert in how it all works. So,
yep. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.